a lot, very kind. I don't know what, a lot of you are looking very cheerful, and I don't understand why that's so. Because the official line is that this is a moment in which we should all be overcome with gloom, and, you know, that's really become the justification for Gordon Brown carrying on as Prime Minister, that he's such a miserable, gloomy bastard that he fits the times that we're now in. I think why a lot of people are looking quite cheerful is because anyone who's been a revolutionary socialist has had quite a sort of difficult time of it for much of the past couple of decades. Because we've been told that the kind of critique of capitalism as an economic system that we put forward was completely out of date, that capitalism ruled the world, that in particular the free market version of capitalism was completely dominant and was going to, in the course of time, solve the world's problems. And there are quite a lot of people who signed up to that, who are now very busy eating their words, because Rebecca's absolutely right. What has happened in the past, particularly in the past 10 days, is not completely unprecedented, but is on an enormous and spectacular scale. The extent of the panic that has gripped the financial markets globally, the disappearance of most of the legendary Wall Street banks, legendary largely for their cynicism, their greed, their skills at speculating and ramping up their bonuses and so on, but nevertheless legendary centres of power. The American writer Tom Wolfe wrote a novel in the 1980s called The Bonfire of the Vanities, whose central figure was a senior guy in an investment bank in Wall Street, and he portrays them thinking of themselves as the masters of the universe. The novel is all about how the central character gets dethroned from his position of glory, and really what we're seeing is a collective dethroning. But the other aspect of the situation, which is really quite extraordinary, is the way in which the American state has responded to it. The heart, the core, the political core of free market capitalism, headed at the present time by the most right-wing Republican administration, well, since the last time we had a series of financial crises as this, in the early 1930s. We have this right-wing Republican administration nationalising on a scale undreamt of. I mean, 85 million, I mustn't use the word, I mean, these are people who operate in billions and trillions. $85 billion spent on rescuing what was until recently the biggest insurance company in the world. And that was just one day. Now, Paulson, the head of the US Treasury, is trying to persuade the US Congress to come up with another $700 billion to prop up the shattered banking system. And it's an extraordinary situation. Yesterday, I mean, Paulson isn't just anyone. Paulson used to be the head of Goldman Sachs, which is about the last surviving Wall Street bank. And yesterday, a Republican senator in the US Congress accused Paulson of financial socialism because of all the money that he's pumping into the system. In other words, neoliberalism, at the core of which was the idea that the market is allowed to operate freely and the state should do as little as possible, is now, at least as an ideology, in complete shreds. So we are really confronting, I think, a major historical turning point. And the question is, the critical question is, how do we understand that turning point? Where did it come from? And what do we do about it? It's clear, I'm going to come back to it, but it's clear what the people at the top of the system want to do about it, but there's still the question of what ordinary working people do in response to what their crisis and what they're going to try and do about it. Now, you can understand the crisis at a number of different levels. For 15 years, serious commentators, including some quite establishment figures, have been arguing that neoliberalism, through deregulating financial markets, encouraging the global integration of financial markets, coming up with tax schemes that rewarded speculation and so on and so forth, that neoliberalism was going to produce, was going to engineer a major financial crisis. People thought that it might have come in 97, 98 with the crisis in East Asia. People thought maybe it had come in 2001 with when the so-called dot-com boom centred on the stock markets collapsed. In neither case did it, partly for reasons that I'm going to come back to. This time it has happened. This is neoliberalism's financial crash. This is neoliberalism's equivalent of 1929 and 31, the financial crashes that produced the Great Depression of the 1930s. But I think we need to understand it at a deeper level, as a reflection, a consequence of the logic of capital. In other words, the particular dynamic, the particular pattern of behaviour characteristic of capitalism as an economic system. And here I think we have to talk about two central features of capitalism that were identified by Karl Marx when he wrote his great work Capital back in the middle decades of the 19th century. Those two fundamental features are firstly exploitation. Capitalism is a system that is fueled by profits. The profits come from the exploitation of wage labour. The mass of workers in the world, whether they work, to use an old-fashioned language that the Labour Party has now forgotten, by hand or by brain, whether they work in a factory or in an office or in a farm or in a hospital, it's through their labour, it's as a result of their labour that capitalists get their profits. So it's a system based upon exploitation, the exploitation of labour. The second fundamental feature of capitalism is that it's a system that's driven by competition. In other words, the capitalists aren't, well, you can tell it to look at them, you know, they're not a happy, loving group of people who really care about each other and put their collective interests before their individual interests. They are, as Marx put it, a band of hostile brothers. In other words, a bunch of thieves who fight among themselves over each trying to get the biggest possible share of their loot. And that's essentially what competition is. But one very important feature about competition is, and it's very important to understanding what's happening now, is competition is a blind process. If you have an economy that's organised through the competition, the rivalries between big firms, transnational corporations, banks, and so on and so forth, you have an economic system in which there's no mechanism, there's no arrangement for looking ahead to seeing where the whole economy is moving. Instead, what you have is a race among rival firms, where each of the rivals is constantly looking to their side and behind them to see what everyone else is doing. Now, if you had a real race like that, where no one is looking ahead, but everyone is looking to the side and behind, sooner or later, the whole bunch of them are going to run into a brick wall or go over a cliff. And that's really what the economic crises, which are a regular and recurrent feature of capitalism as a system, are. That when this blind process of competition drives the whole economy, or even the whole system, into a wall or over a cliff. Now,